The training grounds were unusually quiet that morning, covered in a thin layer of mist that made the air sharp and cold. Rows of young cadets stood waiting for their evaluation, shifting their weight nervously as they glanced toward the main gate. Today, an old veteran was scheduled to supervise their physical drills, and many of them had heard rumors, some respectful, most dismissive. To them, an older man in the military usually meant someone who had retired long ago and returned only because he had nowhere else to go. But the man walking slowly toward them carried a presence that none of them could understand yet. Sergeant Daniel Reed, a veteran with decades of service behind him, stepped onto the field wearing a standard-issue jacket and a calm expression. His pace was steady, though anyone observing closely might notice a slight stiffness in the way he moved, as if the cold air pressed against old wounds buried beneath the surface. The cadets whispered among themselves, some mocking his age, others simply curious. Daniel ignored them all, focusing only on the responsibility he had been given. As he reached the front of the formation, he stopped, letting his eyes move across the group. He had seen hundreds of young soldiers like them, eager, restless, sometimes arrogant, but he had always believed that discipline shaped them into something better. Before he could begin his briefing, a tall, sharp-jawed officer stepped forward. Lieutenant Harris was known for his strictness, but also for his tendency to underestimate anyone who didn't meet his personal definition of strength. His voice cut through the morning silence with a tone dripping in doubt. "Sergeant Reed," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I received word that you requested to be exempt from the endurance demonstration due to some medical reason." The sarcasm on the word medical wasn't subtle. Several cadets exchanged smirks. Others tried to hide their reactions, unsure whether to laugh or remain silent. Reed didn't react. He simply nodded once. "That's correct, Lieutenant. I have clearance from the medical board." Harris scoffed openly. "Clearance? With all due respect, Sergeant, how can you expect these young men to take their evaluation seriously if the supervising officer himself refuses to participate?" Reed stayed calm, but something cold flickered in his eyes. He had dealt with officers like Harris before, men who believed rank measured strength, not experience. Harris stepped closer, his voice rising enough to echo across the yard. "In this academy, excuses don't fly. If you're going to stand here and guide these cadets, you should be able to do every exercise you expect them to do. Unless," he paused dramatically, "unless you're just hiding behind age and paperwork." A few cadets chuckled, though many looked uncomfortable. Reed could feel the weight of their eyes on him, waiting to see how he would respond. He inhaled slowly before answering, choosing his words carefully. "Lieutenant, I assure you I am not hiding behind anything. The reason for my exemption is documented and serious." Harris crossed his arms. "Then show us. If your excuse is real, prove it. Otherwise, drop the act." The challenge hung in the air like a blade. The cadets froze, their earlier amusement shifting into tension. Nobody had expected the conversation to escalate like this. Reed looked at the young faces watching him. He had no desire to embarrass anyone, but he also knew that respect was earned and sometimes demanded. He reached for the zipper of his jacket. The sound was small but sent a shock through the silent field. Harris smirked, expecting to see nothing more than a thin, aging torso. But when Reed pulled the jacket open and slid it off his shoulders, gasps traveled through the crowd like a wave. A massive, jagged scar stretched across the left side of his chest, deep and long, disappearing beneath the fabric of his undershirt. It looked like something carved not by accident, but by violence, something that spoke of battles none of the cadets had ever imagined. Harris went pale. The cadets stared wide-eyed, their mockery turning instantly into shock and guilt. Reed didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. 10 years ago, he said quietly but clearly, I was hit by shrapnel while pulling 2 wounded soldiers out of a collapsed structure overseas. The doctors told me I wouldn't walk again, let alone serve. But I fought my way back, inch by inch. He placed the jacket in the crook of his arm, letting everyone see the full extent of the damage. This scar is the reason I have medical clearance. It's also the reason I'm still standing here today. Not because I'm too weak to participate, but because every deep breath pulls on the tissue that barely healed. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to pause. Harris swallowed hard, his earlier arrogance evaporating in front of everyone. Reed continued, still calm. You asked me to prove myself, Lieutenant. But the truth is, I came here to guide these cadets, not compete with them. Strength isn't always measured by how many miles you can run or how many push-ups you can do. Sometimes it's measured by how many times you stand back up after being told you never will. A few cadets lowered their heads, ashamed of their earlier laughter. Harris stepped back, struggling to form words. Sergeant, I didn't know. Reed lifted a hand gently. You didn't ask. The field remained silent until Reed slowly put his jacket back on, adjusting the collar as if nothing had happened. Then he looked at the cadets once more. Now, he said firmly, shall we begin the evaluation? For the first time that morning, every cadet straightened with genuine respect. Their posture changed, their expressions grew serious, and the mocking energy vanished completely. Reed didn't need to command authority. He had earned it the moment he revealed what he had endured. Harris, still recovering from the shock, stepped aside. Reed gave him a small nod, a gesture of understanding rather than resentment, before turning his attention back to the group. The drills began, and though Reed didn't participate physically, his presence alone pushed the cadets harder than any shouted order could have. They moved with a new sense of purpose, motivated not by fear, but by admiration. They wanted to prove themselves worthy of the man standing before them. As the exercises progressed, Reed quietly observed their form, offering corrections and encouragement. Each cadet responded with newfound discipline, eager to show that they understood the lesson he had taught without ever intending to give it. The lesson that respect is earned through resilience, not bravado. And that real strength often hides beneath scars no one sees until the moment it must be revealed. Asterisk. Asterisk as the cadets pushed through the final round of their endurance drills. The atmosphere on the training grounds had shifted completely. Where there had been doubt and casual disrespect at the start of the morning, there was now a heavy, almost reverent sense of focus. Sergeant Reed watched each of them closely, noting their dedication, their improvements, and the unspoken determination in their movements. The revelation of his scar had left an impact far deeper than any verbal lesson could have delivered. But the day's challenges were far from over. Lieutenant Harris, who had earlier mocked Reed without knowing the truth, stood at the edge of the field, struggling internally with the shame of his own behavior. His eyes followed Reed's every motion as the old veteran moved from cadet to cadet with quiet authority. Harris had always believed discipline came from strictness, from pushing soldiers until they broke and rebuilt themselves. But Reed embodied a different kind of strength, one born from survival, sacrifice, and a calm resilience that seemed unshakable. When the whistle finally blew to signal a short break, the exhausted cadets dropped to the ground, wiping sweat from their brows as Reed approached them. His steps were slow but steady, driven by purpose rather than pride. Good work, Reed said as he reached the nearest group. Remember, consistency matters more than speed. You build endurance by refusing to quit. The cadets nodded, genuinely listening. But before Reed could speak further, Lieutenant Harris approached. His expression was tense, his posture a little too stiff, as if he still wasn't sure how to face the man he had challenged so harshly earlier. Sergeant Reed, Harris said, not as loudly as before. This time, there was no sarcasm, no arrogance, just uncertainty. Reed turned. Yes, Lieutenant? Harris hesitated. The cadets watched in silence, sensing something significant unfolding. I owe you an apology, Harris said finally, forcing the words out. My earlier behavior was unprofessional. I made assumptions I had no right to make. And I disrespected your service. Reed studied him quietly, waiting until Harris finished. Thank you, Lieutenant, Reed replied simply. Acknowledging mistakes is a strength, not a weakness. Harris exhaled, relieved yet still uneasy. If you're willing, Sergeant, I'd like to observe how you evaluate the rest of the exercises. I want to learn from your methods. Reed nodded, appreciating the gesture. Walk with me then. The two men stepped aside as the cadets resumed their routines, but their conversation was interrupted when a sudden alarm blared across the training compound. Everyone froze. The sound was sharp, urgent, a tone used only for real emergencies. An officer from the main building sprinted toward them, shouting, "All units, emergency drill. Fire in the West Storage Facility. Evacuate all personnel and prepare suppression teams." The cadets looked around in confusion. Some assumed it was another exercise. But the officer's frantic expression made it clear this was no simple test. Reed's instincts activated instantly. He had lived through enough chaos to recognize the signs of a real crisis. Smoke began rising in the distance, darkening the sky with thick, swirling clouds. Harris cursed under his breath. That area stores fuel and old ammunition. If the fire spreads, we don't have much time, Reed finished for him. Without hesitation, he commanded, "Cadets, form 2 lines. Move toward the safe zone immediately and assist anyone falling behind. Harris, notify command that I'm heading to the West facility." Harris blinked, startled. "You're heading there? You have medical restrictions." Reed's eyes hardened with the same determination he had carried for decades. "Restrictions don't matter when lives are at stake." Before Harris could protest, Reed began moving toward the smoke. His stride wasn't fast, but it was purposeful. Each step was a reminder of his strength, the kind forged through years of hardship. Several cadets watched him go, their eyes wide with admiration. One of them, a young recruit named Carter, whispered, "He's not afraid of anything." Another cadet replied, "He's been through more than we can imagine." Harris, torn between protocol and respect, finally made a decision. "Cadets, continue to the safe zone. I'm going with him." He sprinted after Reed, catching up as they approached the facility. Flames roared from the building, licking the sky with violent heat. The air shimmered. The ground vibrated with the threat of explosions. Reed assessed the situation instantly. "We need to clear the area of anyone still inside. The fire suppression team is delayed. We can't wait for them." Harris nodded. "I'll take the left entrance. You take the right?" "No," Reed said firmly. "The right entrance leads directly to the storage racks. It's more dangerous." "All the more reason for me to take it," Harris argued. Reed shook his head. "I know that layout better than anyone. You go left." Before Harris could respond, Reed was already moving. The heat hit him like a wall as he reached the right entrance. His lungs tightened, and the scar tissue under his shirt burned painfully, but he pushed through. Inside, visibility was low. Smoke choked the corridors. Reed's eyes watered, but he stayed focused, listening for the faintest sounds, coughing, footsteps, anything. A distant cry echoed from deeper inside. Without hesitation, Reed followed it. A young maintenance officer was pinned under a fallen beam, coughing violently as flames crept closer. Reed rushed to him, ignoring the searing heat. "Hold still," Reed said, gripping the beam. The pain in his chest flared as he pulled with all his strength. His muscles trembled, but he didn't stop. With a final heave, the beam shifted enough for the young man to crawl free. "Get out," Reed ordered. "Now," the man hesitated. "What about you? Move." Reed barked, pushing him toward the exit. As the officer stumbled away, Reed turned to check for others, but the building rumbled dangerously. Outside, Harris emerged from the left entrance carrying another injured worker. "Reed!" he shouted, spotting the veteran still inside through the smoke. But Reed was searching for one last person, a supply officer he had seen earlier entering the facility. He refused to leave anyone behind. Another explosion erupted in a side room, knocking Reed to one knee. His chest burned. His vision blurred. But he forced himself upright, using the wall for support. Finally, he located the supply officer collapsed near the back. Reed dragged him toward the exit, step by agonizing step. Harris saw them and rushed back into the smoke, grabbing the officer's other arm. Together, they pulled him out just as another blast tore through the building, sending debris flying. The three men collapsed onto the ground, coughing violently. Medics rushed to them immediately. Harris looked at Reed, eyes wide with disbelief. "You went in 3 times," he said hoarsely. "You could have been killed." Reed wiped soot from his face, breathing heavily. "Maybe, but I wasn't going to let anyone die while I stood outside watching." Harris stared at him with new understanding. "Sergeant, I misjudged you more than I realized." Reed gave a faint, tired smile. "Experience teaches us all, Lieutenant." Around them, cadets watched in awe as Reed struggled to his feet, refusing help even though his body clearly ached. In their minds, the old veteran had just proven something far greater than physical strength. He had shown the heart of a true soldier. And the day was far from over. Asterisk. The chaos around the burning facility slowly settled as emergency crews finally took over, spraying heavy streams of suppressant foam across the blackened structure. The acrid smell of smoke lingered in the air, mixing with the distant wail of alarms and the low murmur of officers coordinating cleanup efforts. Cadets who had been evacuated earlier now stood in organized rows far from the danger zone, their eyes fixed on the trio of men who had emerged from the destruction. Sergeant Reed sat on a metal crate near an aid station, breathing deeply as a medic checked his vitals. Though soot covered most of his uniform and his forehead bore a minor cut, his expression remained composed. The cadets whispered among themselves, struggling to reconcile the man they had mocked earlier with the hero they had just witnessed. Lieutenant Harris stood nearby, arms crossed tightly over his chest, still shaken by the events inside the burning building. His earlier arrogance had burned away completely, replaced with respect and something else, admiration mixed with guilt. He approached Reed slowly, lowering his voice so only he could hear. "You should be resting," Harris said. Reed glanced at him. "I will when the job is done." Harris exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Sergeant, I've been in this academy for years. I've evaluated hundreds of recruits. But today I learned more from you than from all my experience combined." Reed tilted his head. "What exactly did you learn, Lieutenant?" Harris swallowed, choosing his words carefully. "That leadership isn't about showing strength. It's about showing responsibility, courage, and sacrifice." Reed said nothing at first. Then a faint smile formed on his lips. "If you learned that, then today wasn't wasted." Their conversation was interrupted when the academy commander, a stern, gray-haired colonel, arrived with urgency in his stride. His eyes swept the area before landing on Reed. "Sergeant Reed," he called out. "A word." Reed stood carefully, ignoring the stiffness in his chest. He followed the colonel behind a transport truck, out of the cadet's sight. "I reviewed the incident," the colonel began. "The fire started due to an electrical malfunction. Flames spread rapidly, and the situation was critical before help arrived." Reed nodded silently. "But what I want to address," the colonel continued, "is your decision to enter the facility despite your medical limitations. You risked your life." Reed kept his voice steady. "There were people inside, sir." "Yes," the colonel replied. People who are alive right now because of you." He paused. "Your actions were extraordinary." Reed lowered his eyes. Praise had never been something he sought. The colonel stepped closer. "But this isn't the first time you've put yourself in harm's way. Your record is full of similar incidents. Your body carries the price of your decisions." Reed didn't deny it. "With respect, sir, I've always believed it's my duty." The colonel sighed. "And you've honored that duty more than anyone. But now I must be the one responsible." Reed looked up, confused. The colonel reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Effective immediately," he said slowly. "You are recommended for full medical retirement." Reed froze. "Retirement?" "Not as a punishment," the colonel clarified, "but out of necessity. Your body has endured more than most soldiers ever will. Today you proved you're still willing to give everything. But we can't allow you to break yourself beyond repair." Reed didn't speak. The weight of the words settled around him like thick smoke. The colonel placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You've served this nation with honor. It's time to let the next generation step forward." Reed's eyes drifted toward the cadets standing far across the field. Their young faces watched him with a mixture of awe and respect. "I can still contribute," Reed murmured. "Yes," the colonel agreed. "But not at the cost of your life." After a long silence, Reed quietly accepted the envelope. The decision was final. He returned to the training grounds where Harris and the cadets waited. Harris immediately noticed the envelope in his hand. "What's that?" he asked. Reed didn't answer directly. Instead, he gestured for the cadets to gather around. They formed a wide semicircle, boots crunching on the dusty ground. Reed stood before them, his posture straight despite his exhaustion. "Cadets," he began, his voice steady but softer than usual. "This morning, some of you doubted me, maybe even mocked me. And that's all right. You're still learning." A few cadets shifted uncomfortably. Others kept their eyes fixed on him, waiting. "But today," Reed continued, "I saw courage in all of you. You followed orders. You stayed disciplined. And when you saw danger, you didn't panic." He held up the envelope. "For me, this is my last assignment." Gasps rippled through the group. Harris stepped forward. "Sergeant, they're retiring you?" Reed nodded slowly. "It's time." One cadet shouted, unable to hold back. "But sir, you just saved 3 people. How can they retire you now?" Reed smiled gently. "Because saving people is exactly why they want me to rest. I've spent my whole life in uniform. Every scar I have tells a story. But even the strongest walls eventually need repair." Silence hung heavy in the air. Reed continued, "Your journey is just beginning. You have strength, youth, discipline, and now, I hope, perspective. Remember what happened today. Not because of me, but because of what it showed you." He pointed to the cadets' chests. "True strength comes from here. Not from muscle. Not from shouting orders. From heart." The cadets stood straighter, absorbing every word. Harris approached Reed, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sergeant Reed," he said, voice steady, "on behalf of all of us, thank you for your service." Reed met his eyes. Harris extended his hand. But Reed shook his head and pulled him into a firm embrace instead. The cadets erupted into applause, loud, powerful, heartfelt. For the first time in years, Reed allowed himself to feel the emotion he usually hid. The applause continued as he stepped back, offering the cadets one final salute. They returned the gesture with flawless precision. Later that evening, as Reed prepared to leave the academy grounds for the last time, he stood alone by the gate, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The world felt both familiar and strange, as if he were stepping into a chapter he hadn't yet learned to read. Harris approached quietly. "Where will you go now?" Reed looked at the fading sky. Home, he said softly. Maybe for the first time in a long while. Harris nodded. You deserve it. Reed placed a hand on the gate. Take care of them, he said. Teach them well. I will, Harris promised. Reed took one last look at the training grounds, the field where he had revealed his scar, the place where he had once again proven his worth despite his age. Then he stepped through the gate, walking into a future uncertain but peaceful. Behind him, the academy lights flickered on, illuminating the place where an old veteran had reminded everyone what real strength truly meant. And though he carried scars both visible and hidden, Sergeant Daniel Reed walked forward with pride, knowing he had given everything he had and that it had been enough.